Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of ALN Thursday at 3. Today, our guest is Rich Culbertson. Rich is an ALN Board of Directors member. He is an ALN Senior Fellow, and I've got to get to this because he's got a lot of other things going on. The Rich, why don't you go ahead and say it? No, here I got it. He is
Okay.
also ASTM chair of E53, which contributes to ISO 55,000. And on the international stage, he is the ISO E53 ANSI representative. And you're vice president at NPMA. What is that you're a vice president of?
Three Rivers chapter.
The Three Rivers chapter there in Pittsburgh. So welcome back, Rich. We have talked with you on many levels regarding asset management standards, but we've also talked with you about how these asset management standards involve or influence utilities. And because of your personal situation in Pennsylvania, you've done some deep dive work that has revealed a consistent issue with public utilities. They're actually not in compliance with federal regulations regarding reporting of assets in order to get more funds. Because basically, you got to tell us what you have in order to help us understand why we should increase rates for you to do more. And while it's natural for everyone to say, we need more electricity because of electric cars, we need more gas because subdivisions are being added. There are federal requirements that say you have to list what your assets are. And we have found that very few organizations in the world know what all their assets are. So utilities that don't report what all their assets are de facto are in non-compliance with federal laws and regulations. And Rich and I went to Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill and met with Senator Bob Casey's legislative staff. Rich is from Pennsylvania, so we got a nice meeting. And they're very interested in both the specific issues of errors in gas company proceedings according to federal regulations, but also this systemic issue that all utilities have a problem reporting what their actual assets are. And part of our ask for Senator Casey's legislative staff is for another meeting to further explain how asset management initiatives on the federal level could help utility companies come into compliance with the specific federal laws and regulations that Rich has identified in a paper we sent to Senator Casey's office yesterday, and we'll make public next week in the newsletter. So welcome, Rich. That was a windy, long introduction, but I'm excited about this topic.
Well, it is a very good topic, and the thing with ISO TC 251, as well as ASTM standards, there are to apply to both all industries, regardless of size, and part of the United States, of course, one of the major industries is public utilities. In Pennsylvania, for example, the total public utility income is about half of state income. So that's a huge number. It's billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars per year. And the public utility industry it's your old industries, particularly when electricity first started. The same with gas distributions both started. A lot of these started like in the 20s and 30s. Some of the basis of those still exist today. When these industries started with public utilities commissions, and again, a public utilities commission it's a natural monopoly. And anytime we think about monopolies, we think about, well, monopolies will act like monopolies unless they're highly regulated. But that's an if. They're highly regulated. If they're not highly regulated, they in fact will act like monopolies. when this first started out, back in the 20s, the whole concept was that public utilities are entitled to an adequate return on their investment. That investment is their rate base. So, but over the years, that kind of sounds like a cost plus percentage of cost type contract. Now, even way back in World War I, it was recognized that the government really doesn't want to enter into cost plus percentage of cost type contracts because there's no control of cost. So in other words, the more cost, the more profit. Therefore, half the profit is expenditures. Well, that still pretty well holds to a lot of utilities today. Now, in government contracting, what that's gone to is performance-based contracts, as opposed to you get what you spend and plus more, you get what you perform. One of the major problems, however, with the type of arrangement out with utilities is that if it's a cost plus percentage of cost on their rate base or capital expenditures, that means most of the money will be spent on focused on new projects, new capital assets versus the maintenance of existing assets. So we've seen over the last particular years is that we've had, particularly in the electricity industry, but also the gas industry, problems have occurred with maintenance, like the huge fires that occurred in California, some more recent in Hawaii, some more recent in Texas. All those things have to do with maintenance and to make sure that infrastructure, even under stress, is able to perform safely. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they have not performed safely. There's been, after the fires in California, there's an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal called "Wired to Fail," and that article goes through what happened with PG&E. Under PG&E, for example, they had explosions in San Bruno that killed people and burned like 8 blocks. And PG&E, as far as process to get well, they in fact adopted ISO 9000, but also ISO 55000 as a process to get well for that. As a matter of fact, PG&E has been a star as far as being for their corrective actions, but also they belong to TC 251, but also they've kept up with that.
On the gas side.
On the gas side, unfortunately, apparently the electric side, well, we don't need to do that, except for those fires in Paradise, California, where they burned down a whole town, killed a bunch of people, and then of course they after the fact was recognized that it was wired to fail. So I reckon that if you ever get a chance, read that article in the Wall Street.
All right. So let me rephrase it to see if I understand. They are pointing out that the systematic approach to the electric side appeared to be maintained to failure, that they just were keeping their items until they failed, and that was the level of maintenance. And the failure was transformer explosion that caused fires.
That's right. But there are regulations, though, that the infrastructure of public utilities must be safe, must be kept safe, must be adequately maintained. However, the incentive as far as how utilities receive additional profits, that has to do with the size of the rate base. So unless the incentives changed, for the most part, these organizations will not change, particularly when public utilities are also publicly traded corporations. So when they're publicly traded corporations, the purpose of public traded corporation, of course, is to make profit, or in certain cases, to maximize profit. But that has to be constrained, however, with making sure that they don't destroy the company or bet the company on bad practices. Unfortunately, like anything else, is that it only gets bad when it gets bad. I think we've seen other cases when it gets really bad, then it's too late. People die, things happen, property is destroyed.
And there are enough specific examples of this throughout the country for the ALN to cry wolf, or not cry wolf, say that the emperor has no clothes. There is a systemic problem that is causing fatalities, human suffering, property damage, and the taxpayers are having to incur corrective measures to recover from these systemic problems. And we know that, as John Shelness, John, thanks, pointed out with Green Book regulations, that all of these organizations are in non-compliance and that we can start a class action revolution to force utilities to do what they're supposed to do. However, we told Senator Casey's staff, we don't want to do that. What we'd rather do is work with legislation to help educate, train, get public utilities up to speed with current asset management practices so that they come in compliance with existing regulations and reduce the amount of damage created by poorly maintained equipment.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, there are various avenues of which asset management can play. Individuals can play and organizations can play. In a lot of cases, when proposed regulations are published in the federal registers, there's usually a comment period, they're around 60 days. Now, individuals and organizations can comment on various aspects. For example, there within the last year or so, there's been requests for comments on pipeline safety, part of the Department of Transportation. And so when they ask for comments, then those who have something to say and those who have knowledge, it's best that they provide responses to the government, because the government has to respond to all those comments. Those comments have standing and are meant to influence and improve proposed regulations. The other side of that too is that, like enduring rate cases, where the utility says, well, I need to increase rates. So they send it in the Public Utilities Commission, a proposal to increase rates. The Public Utilities Commission at that point will establish what they call a rate case. And some of the first portions within that rate case, they will ask for public comment. Now, under that public comment, there's quality comments and there's comments which are not worth too much. If 10 people show up and say, well, I think the rates are high enough now and it's harming me for increased rates. Well, that goes into the record, but it's not very useful, because obviously most people don't want to pay more than they pay now. However, if you have a quality testimony which goes into the record, which has to be considered in the rate case itself by the commission, then that's different. In the last few times, for example, what I've tried to do is fill the record with quality comments. I mean, for example, one of the last ones with the utilities, they wanted a 19% increase. Understand, 19% increase in rates. Well, the inflation rate right now is around 3.5%. So when you see a 19% increase, and another one's right now asking for around a 13% rate increase. These are huge increases that really harm ratepayers, particularly those who can't afford extravagant rates. But that is done, though. If you comment, you have a chance. If there's no comments, there's very little chance.
So the US federal government are customers of these utilities. So that's a 19% increase to the federal government in addition to individual citizens.
Oh, absolutely. And also what happens with that, the federal government provides to the states large grants, LIHEAP, which has low income heating assistance. And there are other assistance. The CARES Act also provided utility assistance to those who couldn't afford or were harmed by large public utilities. And what that is, that's a block of money. Okay. Therefore, the block of money is only finite, zero-sum game. So in other words, what is taken part by the utility with their rate increase, but also part of that goes to the the customer. The problem when those rates increase, more of that goes to the utility rather than those who actually need it. So if one of the Senator Casey's concerns right now is something he calls like green
Greedflation,
and greedflation.
greedflation.
You know, where companies are acting greedy during inflationary times to grab more than they probably should be. So as far as greedflation, when you see something like a rate increase of 19% or 13%, that's an indication of there's probably some greed in there someplace. Particularly what happens in a lot of cases. What's supposed to happen with those who receive grants? It's subject to what's called 2 CFR 200, which are the conditions of receiving it. And these means you have to be audited, and you have to have internal controls, and you have to comply with what's considered to be the cost principles. Well, in a lot of cases, these Public Utilities Commission glance right over that, even though it's a requirement to receive the grant. They haven't got up to speed the requirements of what was required by law. And there's attached grants.
John Shelness is aware of this. He's probably seen your presentations before, or he knows his federal government pretty well. He has posted a Green Book CFR Part 231.3. He's got a link to it. So,
but
thank you, John.
if you haven't read the GAO Yellow Book, which has to do with audits, and the GAO Green Book, which has to do with internal controls, it's really good reading. And those things, it really applies to not only just government operations, they're the basic commercial operations of how companies should manage themselves, corporate governance. And it's also a guidebook to stay out of trouble and to do well. It's just like asset management. These things go hand in hand. Good asset management and good controls go well together.
And it's a good stick for us to be holding while we advocate for the carrot of improved efficiencies and better organizational outcomes that will come with following the rules and regulations, complying with existing laws. So, Rich, we've sent the letter to Senator Casey's office. What is an ideal outcome for our involvement with legislators on trying to help utilities improve the management of their assets?
I think, number one, the best outcome would be if the GAO actually validated that the requirements that are included in 2 CFR 200, and are they doing it? What are their plans to do that? And have them validate on like on a self-assessment. What are you doing on that? Do you recognize it? Or what is your corrective action plan to recognize it? But then once it's determined they have not been doing it, then of course there should be additional audits to determine what in fact has been the harm. What's supposed to happen in rate cases right up front when the utility comes in and says, I want additional $200 million a year for income. First of all, they should take a look at the rate base and making sure that what's in the rate base per the law is actual legitimate cost. And actual legitimate cost would be, in fact, those costs that, in fact, should be capitalized. Costs that should not be capitalized would be, for example, if the law says that customers own their customer service line, but the utility says, well, gee, I like that market too. Why not just replace customer service lines along with my own service lines? Well, that means then the utility has on their books property that doesn't belong to them. And as you know, that what's on your balance sheet needs to be your property. But if it belongs to somebody else, that's a major problem, because the fact is that that customer service line belongs to a private owner as part of their real property. And that the utility says, well, I paid for it too. Well, that's a big no-no. So that wouldn't be actual legitimate cost. It's the same way with under other government contracts, is that all costs going to a government contract must be necessary. It must be prudent. It must be reasonable. All those things. So if cost were not necessary, say for example, as opposed to replacing pipelines when they need to be replaced, they said, well, we'll have an accelerated pipeline replacement. In other words, we will destroy and abandon and replace property that continues to be suitable use into the future. Well, that means that replacing those particular lines are not necessary.
The other thing it sets them up to is operate to failure. And that is not the law. The law is you must maintain what you have.
Oh, absolutely. And see what should occur is that just like our own bodies, a lot of times if we think certain weaknesses, what we do, we get testing. We gather data to determine what in fact is the condition of certain things. The same with pipelines or electricity. That in a lot of cases, utilities, like electric utilities, will send out drones or helicopters or whatever to take a look at the condition of certain transformers and lines and such, particularly in areas that are remote. So when they do that, they have a basis to determine something needs to be replaced. If, on the other hand, they don't do testing, they don't try to, they wait for the lines to fall and catch things on fire before they determine there's a need. Of course, that's the wrong way to do that. The same with pipelines. If they see leaks, that's an indication that maybe the line itself is bad, not only one place, but multiple places. But that too should be tested to the extent where there's reasonable certainty that it should be replaced. And it should not necessarily be based upon age. In other words, just because an item is fully depreciated, that doesn't necessarily mean that item needs to be replaced, even though an item of fully depreciation doesn't provide profit because it's not under rate, it doesn't contribute to the rate base anymore. So you get in these kind of hidden incentives to go ahead and replace things where they need to be replaced or not. But if the utility doesn't try to determine upfront what actually needs to be replaced based upon experience and knowledge and testing, and after the fact, after they replace certain items, they also don't do an after action inspection. Just like the same thing. If you have an operation, they think it's cancer, those things are tested to determine, yes, we were right, it was. The same with pipes. You'd want to make
We've removed it and it's gone, and 6 months later it's still gone, and another 6 months later it's still gone.
Yeah.
That's called checkups, which is maintenance.
Right.
You've got to do that. Yeah.
And all those things kind of flow together. In other words, what in fact is good management? And most would say, well, if you really want to figure out if you make good decisions, take a look at the data, test it. And that's a cheap way to do it, because then once you do that, you can perfect your decision-making capability.
That's what this all comes down to, is improving decision-making capability.
And there are variations. There are variations, over the years of the type of material that was used in pipelines and electricity. And they may vary over years, but also from utility to utility, as well as the environment of a utility, whether that be in Southern California or Northern California, or whether that be in Ohio or Pennsylvania. These things have their variations to it, but each of those utilities should, in fact, understand the conditions of their area and manage that appropriately.
Now, we're not trying to just be whistleblowers here. We're trying to be educators. We're trying to use the fact that we can easily point to so many utility failures that it's systemic. And sure, good for us to identify the systemic issue, but that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is provide the education and training necessary for leaders to establish a culture of asset management at the utilities so that systemic issues are resolved.
Well, one of the things that's also danger right now, if utilities take all the oxygen out of the air at this point, as time goes on, we believe there will be better ways of producing electricity and heat and gas, whether that be things like hydrogen or whether that be other types of things that are more efficient than today. However, going to those new technologies also costs money. Therefore, the new technology may be unaffordable simply because those utilities have spent a tremendous amount of money on old technology, reasonably or unreasonably, and customers cannot afford to go to the new technology. And again, it harms the present, but also can harm the future. And that's why all that stuff is important to make sure that everything works as it's supposed to be. The laws and regulations, I think, for the most part, are pretty good. It is the compliance from the top to the bottom. In other words, at the federal level, providing grants, but also going through the states and making sure the states are doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as their own internal controls, but also those utilities are also doing what they're supposed to do under their own internal controls. So all along there, it must be working. And when there's a weak link, it harms the whole system, the whole chain. And that's the thing that we want to remember, but also to recognize that. But if you don't look, if no one looks, then obviously no one knows and no one has to take corrective action. So it's really important that utilities look, commissions look, and the federal government look.
So I applaud your efforts in this area, Rich, and it's taken me a long time to come up to speed with where you're at on all of this. It's a complex subject, and it's complex what we're asking utilities to do. However, it is possible, and we want to encourage them to do what is possible. So if anyone wants to join the initiative that Rich and I have started off, we can reach out to the senators and representatives of your state and join together so that we go to the right committee head to initiate either a GAO study or audits or whatever actions they feel are appropriate for the federal government to do once they're alerted to this situation.
Yeah, the main thing on all this stuff, I think the heart of it is asset management, but also internal controls. Part of those internal controls are supposed to keep watch over waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. And when they exist, it's important to make sure that there are preventive actions, there are detective actions, and there are corrective actions. And all that should be also documented to make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to be. But a lot of times these things start with complaints. So it's important when you see things, say things, and make sure those people who are responsible to react do act. In a lot of cases, again, some of these things are in kind of a conflict of situations. You know, it's just like a lot of times the supervisor is responsible for the actions of its employees. So if the employee gets in trouble, upper management generally looks, well, what did their boss do about that? So in a lot of cases, the supervisor will protect the subordinate. And so it's important to even to watch out to what in fact is that dynamic as far as the urge to do good and to not to do bad.
Yes. So if anyone does want to join Rich and I, we're hoping for another meeting on Capitol Hill, Senator Casey's office. When we get that set up, we'll be able to go to other senators and say this ball is rolling. So I've put my email address. If you're interested in reaching out to your state senators and representatives, let me know, and we'll do this together on a united front from the Asset Leadership Network. So Rich, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our patron organizational members and all of our organizational members. And thank you to you, this audience. Please reach out and let's stir some things up on Capitol Hill that result in improving the United States for everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good.